They didn't explain. They didn't warn you. They didn't say goodbye. One day they were there. The next day, nothing. No argument. No closure. Just silence. And somehow that silence was louder than any fight you ever had. Here's the shocking truth. People don't leave without explaining because they're careless. They leave without explaining because silence gives them control. And once you understand why, you'll realize something terrifying. The quiet exit is the most powerful move in any relationship. Stay with me, because the part everyone misses is coming. At first, you don't panic. You rationalize. They need space. They're overwhelmed. They'll text later. You check your phone without admitting it. Once an hour, then every few minutes, then constantly, and slowly the realization hits. This isn't space. This is distance. And distance, when it isn't explained, becomes abandonment. Brain starts asking questions, painful ones, questions with no answers. And unanswered questions are where the mind begins to torture itself. Here's the part nobody tells you. Most people who leave silently didn't wake up one morning and decide to disappear. They tried. They hinted. They softened their tone. They swallowed their frustration. They waited for change. And when nothing changed, they changed themselves quietly, emotionally, internally. They began letting go long before you noticed. So when they finally left, it felt sudden to you. But to them, it felt late. That's why there was no explanation. They already gave it, just not in words. Now here's where silence becomes dangerous. Explanation invites debate. Debate invites hope. Hope keeps people attached. Silence removes all three. It shuts the door without slamming it. It denies you the chance to argue, to fix, to plead, to promise change. Silence says one thing: I'm done deciding. And nothing is more final than that. This is why silence hits harder than rejection. Rejection has reasons. Reasons can be challenged. Silence has none. So the mind fills the gap. And it always fills it with self-blame. What did I miss? Why wasn't I enough? Was I too much? Was I nothing? Silence doesn't answer. It just watches you unravel. That's power. Not loud power. Not aggressive power. Quiet power. The kind that lingers. Now let's talk about why this hurts men differently. Men are conditioned to respond, to fix, to act. To confront problems head on. Silence gives them no target. No opponent. No solution. So instead of acting outward, they turn inward. And that's where the damage begins. The mind loops. The ego fractures. Confidence erodes. Because silence feels like failure without knowing what failed. And uncertainty is unbearable. Here's the twist. Person who leaves silently often isn't trying to hurt you. They're trying to protect themselves. From more conversations that go nowhere. From more emotional exhaustion. From feeling unseen. They choose silence because speaking never changed anything. So they stop speaking. Not out of cruelty. Out of resignation. But intention doesn't change impact. Silence still wounds deeply. And here's the part that hurts the most. Silence forces the person left behind to keep carrying alone. There's no shared pain. No shared goodbye. Just one person grieving while the other moves on. That imbalance creates obsession. Because attachment thrives on uncertainty. If they hated you, you could move on. If they explained, you could process it. But silence keeps the door slightly open. Just enough to keep you stuck. If this feels personal, pause here. You're not weak. You're human. And this happens to more people than anyone admits. If you've ever been left like this, comment below, no explanation. You'll be surprised how many people understand. And subscribe before you forget. Because the next part changes how you see power forever. Now let's expose the real mechanism. Silence creates a psychological vacuum. And vacuums must be filled. Your mind fills it with memories, with what-ifs, with regret, with imagined futures that will never happen. You don't miss the person. You miss the version of the story that silence never allowed to finish. That's why closure feels impossible, because closure usually comes from dialogue, and silence refuses dialogue. Here's something uncomfortable. People who leave without explaining often know exactly what they're doing. They know silence will haunt you. They know it will linger. They know it will keep them relevant long after they're gone. Sometimes it's subconscious. Sometimes it isn't. Either way, silence guarantees one thing. You won't forget them easily. Explanation fades. Silence echoes. But silence isn't always manipulation. Sometimes it's a boundary, a last line of defense. When someone feels unheard for too long, they stop trying to be heard. And that's when communication dies. Not loudly, quietly. That's why relationships rarely end with explosions. They end with indifference. And indifference is the final stage. Here's the paradox. The person who leaves silently often feels powerless before they leave. Ignored. Dismissed. Emotionally small. Silence becomes their first experience of control. They take it and never look back. But power taken through silence comes at a cost. It teaches avoidance. It teaches disappearance. It teaches emotional shutdown. And those lessons don't stay in one relationship. They follow you. Now let's talk about the aftermath. For silence, trust breaks differently. You stop believing words. You overanalyze tone. You fear calm moments. Because calm once meant someone was preparing to leave. Silence doesn't just end relationships. It reshapes how people love next time. It creates guarded hearts, hyper-awareness, emotional armor. And armor protects, but it also isolates. Here's the most brutal truth. Silence works best on people who still care. If you didn't care, their absence would feel peaceful. Pain proves attachment, and attachment is what gives silence its power. So if silence destroyed you, it means the connection was real, even if the ending wasn't. So what do you do when someone leaves without explaining? You stop chasing meaning from someone who chose absence. You accept that silence is a decision, a complete sentence, a final answer. Not the one you wanted, but the one you got. And you build closure without their participation, because waiting for them keeps you trapped in their silence. And if you're the one who leaves quietly, ask yourself this. Are you protecting your peace or avoiding discomfort? Silence used as a boundary is strength. Silence used as punishment is cruelty. Know the difference, because unresolved endings have a way of resurfacing in new faces, new relationships, new mistakes. Here's the final realization. People don't fear being alone. They fear being erased. Silence feels like erasure, like you never mattered enough to deserve an explanation. But that feeling is a lie. Someone else's inability to communicate does not define your value. It only reveals their limits. So remember this. They didn't leave because you weren't enough. They left because silence was easier than honesty. That choice says more about them than it ever could about you. Would you survive being left like this? Tell me in the comments and subscribe, because next time, we're exposing why people who leave without explaining almost always feel it later. But that silence is even louder.